Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back in time, far, far away from the endless scroll of your phone and the little anxieties of the day. We're going to explore some, let's just say, less luxurious corners of history. We're starting off in the frosty, rugged world of the Vikings. Now, trust me, being a real Viking was nothing like the movie's less glorious rating, we'll get to that. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And maybe leave a comment telling me where you're tuning in from tonight and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how these stories travel across the world and through different moments in the day now. Close your eyes, dim the lights if you can, maybe turn on a fan for some gentle white noise. Or just snuggle deeper into whatever cozy spot you've found. Imagine the sharp, salty air of a fjord filling your lungs. It's cold, crisp, biting, carrying the scent of the sea, wood smoke, and something else, something a little bit wild and unwashed. You can hear the distant bleating of sheep on a rocky hillside, the creak of timbers from a longship pulled ashore, and maybe the low murmur of voices from a nearby longhouse. You're standing on a muddy path, the kind where every step sinks a little, your rough wool tunic doing little to ward off the persistent chill. Your boots, simple affairs of leather, are damp, and you can feel the cold seeping right up into your toes. This isn't the glittering, horned helmet Hollywood version. This is the gritty, everyday reality. And in this reality, something is bothering you. A dull throb behind your eye, radiating down into your jaw. A persistent, nagging ache that makes chewing even the simplest dried fish feel like a battle. You have a toothache. And in the world of the Vikings, this was less a minor inconvenience and more. Well, a potential life-threatening crisis. Ever wonder what it would be like to deal with a toothache when the closest thing you had to modern medicine was a shaman muttering incantations and offering you a questionable herbal poultice? Yeah, it wasn't pretty. We have this romanticized image of Vikings as purely warriors, sailing the seas, but they were farmers, traders, craftspeople, and they suffered from the same mundane ailments as everyone else. Tooth decay was rampant. Their diet, while maybe not as sugar-laden as ours, still included grains, honey, and fermented drinks that did a number on enamel. And the tools for dealing with it, let's just say they weren't designed for comfort. Imagine trying to fix a delicate structure like a tooth with tools primarily designed for shaping wood or forging metal. It's like trying to perform open-heart surgery with a butter knife, and a cheerful shrug. The archaeological evidence tells a fascinating, if slightly wince-inducing, story. Skulls unearthed from Viking-era gravesites show widespread signs of dental problems, cavities, abscesses, and significant wear. But they also show something else, something surprising, signs of attempted dental work. This wasn't just passive suffering. There was some effort to alleviate the pain, to fix the problem. Think about that. In a time when survival was often a daily struggle and the causes of disease were completely misunderstood, people were still trying to tackle the agony of a bad tooth. It shows a level of ingenuity, perhaps born of sheer desperation, that's genuinely impressive, and a level of pain tolerance that makes our modern complaints about the dentist's drill seem utterly pathetic. You can almost hear the grimaces from 1,000 years ago, echoing through the ages. The throb is relentless. It's not just a simple ache anymore. It feels like a tiny, angry drumbeat behind your eye, keeping time with the frantic pulse in your temple. You try pressing a cold, damp cloth against your cheek, a futile gesture against the inferno raging inside your jaw. You think about the wisdom passed down, maybe chewing on a bit of willow bark. It's said to have properties. Numbing properties. You tear off a piece from a nearby branch, its texture rough and bitter in your mouth. You chew, the acrid taste doing little to distract from the main event. It feels like you're trying to put out a bonfire with a teacup now. Imagine, in this moment of agony, someone suggests a cure. Not a gentle filling or a soothing root canal. Oh no, Viking solutions were direct. Sometimes brutally so. We see evidence of teeth that were filed down. Filed, think about that. Someone, perhaps a skilled craftsperson with a steady hand and a complete lack of anesthesia, would take a file, the kind you might use on wood or metal, and reshape your tooth. Why? Maybe to relieve pressure, to access a cavity. The reasons aren't always clear, but the sheer raw reality of it is enough to make your own teeth ache in sympathy. Imagine the grating sound, the vibrations through the bone, the feeling of it. It's a shudder-inducing thought, isn't it? Trying to make a bad tooth better by essentially roughing it up even more. And what about extraction? The ultimate solution for a truly rotten tooth. Forget sterile environments and pain-numbing injections. Your dentist was likely the local blacksmith, or perhaps just the strongest person around with a pair of pliers, or even just their bare hands and sheer force. The office was wherever you happened to be standing, perhaps leaning against the side of a longhouse or sitting on an upturned crate. The tools were basic, probably not designed specifically for teeth. Imagine someone grabbing a pair of iron pliers, the kind they use to hold hot metal, and coming towards your face. There's no gentle coaxing, no Novocaine smile, just a firm grip, a grunt, and well, the less detail, the better for your relaxation, perhaps. But the point is, it was a violent, traumatic event. You weren't just losing a tooth. You were likely undergoing a significant physical ordeal that could easily lead to infection, blood loss, or worse. This wasn't just about pain. It was about survival. A severe tooth infection could spread, causing sepsis, a potentially fatal condition even today. In the Viking Age, without antibiotics, an abscess could be a death sentence. That persistent throb in your jaw could, quite literally, be the beginning of the end. So, while the methods seem barbaric to us, born of desperation and limited understanding, they were sometimes the only option. You were gambling that the trauma of the extraction was a better bet than letting the rot continue its insidious spread. It puts our modern dental anxieties, the fear of a drill, the sting of a needle, into a rather stark perspective, doesn't it? It makes you appreciate your fluoride toothpaste and your comfortably upholstered dentist's chair in a whole new light. The willow bark does little. It's just a bitter distraction, like trying to ignore a raging fire by focusing on a flickering candle. The pain is a physical presence now, a hot, insistent weight in your head. You try lying down, hoping that stillness will somehow quiet the storm in your mouth, but it just seems to amplify it. You notice the calluses on your hands, the ache in your shoulders from a day of work, simple, honest aches that now seem trivial compared to this all-consuming dental agony. Your mind drifts, perhaps wishing for the soothing touch of a loved one, or just anything that isn't this pulsing torment beyond the decay and the grim attempts at extraction. The Vikings faced other dental challenges. Their diet, rich in coarse grains and tough, dried meats, led to significant tooth wear. Imagine chewing day in and day out on food that required serious grinding power. Your teeth were your primary tools for breaking down sustenance, and they paid the price. Over time, the enamel would wear thin, exposing the more sensitive dentin beneath. This wasn't just about cavities. It was a slow, grinding process of deterioration that affected almost everyone. You might look around at your fellow villagers, and if you were brave enough to peer into their mouths, you'd see a collection of worn-down, perhaps blackened, stumps. A community united by masticatory wear and tear life in a Viking settlement wasn't just about raiding and glory. It was about community, farming, trade, and survival. Your health, including your dental health, directly impacted your ability to contribute. A debilitating toothache meant you couldn't work, couldn't chew properly, couldn't function. You were a burden, or at least less effective. There wasn't a formalized medical system as we understand it. Healing was often in the hands of the community elders, knowledgeable women, or perhaps someone believed to have special connection to the gods or spirits. These healers used a mix of herbal remedies, folk practices, and sometimes, rather alarming surgical interventions. Your dentist might be the same person who helped with childbirth, set a broken bone, or offered advice on planting crops. A true jack of all trades whose dental skills were likely self-taught and highly experimental. Think about the knowledge transfer. There were no dental schools, no textbooks. Skills were learned through observation, trial, error, and maybe a few screamed lessons. Imagine being an apprentice to a Viking bone setter or healer. Right, see that tooth, looks wobbly, fetch me the hot poker. No, wait, the blunt chisel first. It's a miracle anyone survived these treatments, let alone found relief. This wasn't a profession, it was a necessity, born of pain and the urgent need to maintain functionality in a harsh world. Ever wonder what ancient painkillers tasted like? Probably awful, and probably not very effective against a deep-seated infection. You might be offered a concoction of herbs, possibly mixed with ale or mead, hope to dull the senses or perhaps induce enough vomiting that you forgot about your tooth. It was a lottery, really. Would the cure be worse than the ailment? Often, yes. But when the pain is a hammer blow behind your eye, you might try anything. The throbbing has settled into a persistent, heavy ache now, a dull, relentless companion that overshadows everything else. The vibrant colors of the world seem muted, the sounds distant. You can barely focus on the simple task of mending a fishing net, your fingers clumsy, your mind consumed by the fiery knot in your jaw. You feel a pang of isolation, even surrounded by the familiar hustle of the settlement. How could you explain this to someone who hadn't felt it? It wasn't just pain. It was a draining, soul-sapping weariness that made you want to retreat into the darkest corner of the longhouse and simply cease to exist until it was overdought in a society like the Vikings, where physical capability was often tied to status and survival, chronic pain or disfigurement. Even something as minor as missing teeth or a visibly infected jaw could have social consequences. You relied on your strength for farming, for crafting, for defending your home, perhaps even for trading over long distances. Someone weakened by constant pain or infection wasn't pulling their weight. You might become reliant on others, a position no free Viking would envy. And appearances, while maybe not paramount in our modern, image-obsessed way, still mattered. A face swollen with infection, teeth blackened or missing, these were visible signs of ill health, which could be interpreted in various ways, not all of them sympathetic. Perhaps there were superstitions surrounding dental problems. Was it a sign of displeasure from the gods, the work of malevolent spirits, or just bad luck, a random cruelty dealt by the Norns? Folk beliefs often entwine the physical with the supernatural. Imagine someone advising you to perform a specific ritual, perhaps burying a fallen tooth under a certain type of tree at midnight, or wearing a charm carved from bone taken from a particular animal. These weren't just idle superstitions. They were attempts to impose order and agency on a world where the causes of suffering were invisible and uncontrollable. You might tie a small bag of dried herbs around your neck, recommended by an elder, its contents smelling faintly of earth and something acrid. You wear it more out of hope than conviction, a small, silent plea against the agony. Beyond the violent interventions, the primary methods for dealing with toothache were palliative, not curative. Poultices made from boiled herbs, sometimes mixed with animal fats or even urine, yes, really hygiene standards were. Different might be applied to the swollen cheek. The idea was to draw out the infection, or perhaps just to provide a bit of warmth or distraction. You might be given infusions to drink, bitter brews of willow bark, chamomile, or other plants known for their pain-relieving or anti-inflammatory properties, knowledge hard-won through generations of trial and error. But these were temporary fixes, band-aids on a gaping wound. The underlying problem remained, a ticking time bomb in your mouth. It's a stark reminder that for most of human history, dealing with even simple ailments was a deeply uncertain, often terrifying process. Never pause to think about how lucky you are to have access to a simple painkiller and a trained professional for a toothache. It's a luxury kings 1,000 years ago couldn't dream of. The throbbing has subsided slightly, replaced by a dull ache and a profound weariness. You feel it deep in your bones, an exhaustion that isn't just physical, but the kind that settles in when your body is constantly fighting itself. You run your tongue carefully over the offending tooth, a cautious exploration of the battleground. It feels unstable. A small movement sends a sharp spike of pain radiating upwards. You avoid chewing on that side, favoring the other, a subtle, unconscious adjustment that will likely cause its own problems down the line. Uneven wear, strain on the healthy teeth. It's a constant, low-level negotiation with discomfort. But here's something truly surprising, something that archaeologists have discovered that completely upends the image of Vikings as purely rough-and-tumble warriors. They weren't just dealing with decay. Some Vikings were apparently practicing cosmetic dentistry. Imagine that. On skulls found in burial sites, particularly in Sweden, researchers have found evidence of intentional modification, horizontal grooves filed into the front teeth. We're not talking about fixing a cavity here. This was deliberate alteration of healthy teeth. Why? The exact purpose is still debated. Were they markers of status, identification, a sign of belonging to a specific group or profession? Were these filed teeth painted? The possibilities are fascinating and, frankly, a little bizarre when you consider the tools available. Imagine the scene. You've already endured the agony of a toothache and perhaps a brutal extraction. Now someone suggests filing grooves into your perfectly good front teeth. With what? A metal file, just like the ones used to shape swords or repair shields. It must have been an incredibly painful process, done without any form of anesthetic. And for what? To look a certain way, to signal something to your peers. It suggests a level of social complexity and concern for appearance that we don't often associate with the popular image of Vikings. It's a weird, unsettling detail that makes you pause and rethink everything. Were these grooves like ancient tattoos? A visible mark that told a story about the person, think about the courage, or perhaps the intense social pressure required to undergo such a procedure willingly. You sit there, perhaps gripping a piece of leather or wood between your hands, while someone scrapes away at your enamel, vibrations running through your skull. It's a stark reminder that human beings, across cultures and time, have a deep-seated need to modify their bodies, to adorn themselves, to signal their identity, even at great personal cost. Never wonder what your own teeth say about you. Not just their health, but their appearance, how you've cared for them, perhaps even modifications you've had done. Our teeth tell a story. Just like those ancient Viking ones. It makes the idea of a Viking dentist even more complex. Were there specialists who did this filing? Were they the same people who pulled teeth? Or was this a separate skill entirely, perhaps practiced by someone like a jeweler or a skilled bone carver? The precision required suggests someone with a steady hand and considerable practice. And the pain, the sheer, raw, undeniable pain of metal on raw tooth. It's a level of voluntary suffering that's hard to comprehend from our comfort-controlled present. You can almost taste the metallic dust, feel the grating sensation, hear the sharp intake of breath from the person enduring it. It's a window into a world where pain was simply a more integrated part of life. The throbbing is a low hum now, a constant reminder tucked away in the back of your mind. You find yourself instinctively touching your cheek, a quiet, nervous gesture. Sleep offers little escape. The discomfort follows you into your dreams, twisting familiar shapes into unsettling forms. Even the simple pleasure of a warm bowl of stew is fraught with peril, every chew a carefully calculated risk. You watch others eating, their easy, unconscious movements a sharp contrast to your own guarded mastication, and feel a flicker of quiet envy. How easily they take it for granted, this fundamental act of sustaining life, unburdened by the silent war in their mouth. Let's linger for a moment on those tools. We imagine crude pliers, perhaps, but think about the range of implements a Viking craftsperson would have had. Chisels, punches, knives, files, heated irons, all designed for working tough materials like wood, bone, or metal. Now imagine adapting these for the delicate, sensitive environment of the human mouth. A chisel to perhaps chip away at a decayed section. A heated iron to cauterize a bleeding gum or kill a nerve. The very thought is enough to send a shiver down your spine. These weren't precision instruments. They were blunt, unforgiving, and designed for force, not finesse. It's like trying to mend a delicate piece of pottery with a sledgehammer and a prayer. There was also the prevailing belief in some cultures, and perhaps even in the Viking world, that tooth decay was caused by tiny, tooth worms burrowing into the tooth. Imagine explaining your agony. Ah, yes, the worms are particularly active today. The cure might involve trying to lure the worms out, perhaps with sweet substances, or trying to kill them with smoke or acrid fumes directed into the mouth. It sounds utterly bizarre to us, a charmingly naive explanation for a complex biological process. But in a world without microscopes or germ theory, it was a perfectly rational attempt to understand an invisible enemy. You might picture yourself leaning over a smoking brazier, trying to inhale the fumes, hoping to fumigate the tiny culprits allegedly eating your tooth from the inside out. The smell of burning herbs and charcoal fills your nostrils, acrid and unpleasant, doing nothing for the pain but adding a new layer of discomfort. First you realize with a cold, sharp clarity that your body is not entirely your own. It is vulnerable, susceptible to invisible forces, worms you cannot see, decay you cannot stop, pain you cannot control. All your strength, your skill with an axe, your ability to sail the waves, none of it can protect you from this small, internal rebellion. You are utterly at the mercy of a failing piece of bone and enamel, and the desperate, often brutal remedies available. The vast, wild world outside shrinks to the size of your aching jaw, and you feel terrifyingly small, terrifyingly fragile. It's a humbling, terrifying realization that cuts deeper than any blade. This lack of understanding about the root causes of disease, combined with the limited toolkit, meant that healing was often more about managing symptoms or resorting to drastic, sometimes fatal, interventions. There was no understanding of bacteria, of infection pathways, of sterile technique. The same hand that plunged into the soil might moments later be probing inside a bleeding mouth. It was a world where healing was a gamble, and the odds were often stacked against you. The best you could hope for was resilience, a strong constitution, and maybe a little bit of luck that your ailments weren't too severe or didn't pick up a nasty secondary infection. It makes you look at a simple tube of toothpaste with a newfound reverence, doesn't it? A tiny tube of modern magic that holds at bay the horrors of tooth worms and blacksmith dentists. The dull ache is a shadow now, constantly lurking at the edges of your awareness. You find yourself instinctively chewing on the opposite side, a subtle, ingrained habit. You catch a glimpse of your reflection in a still pool of water. Your face looks tired, etched with the subtle lines of persistent discomfort. You avoid talking too much, fearful that a wrong movement might revive the pain in full force. Social gatherings become less enjoyable. The simple act of sharing a meal is a chore, not a pleasure. You find yourself withdrawing slightly, your attention turned inward, focused on the quiet battle happening within your own skull. It's a lonely kind of suffering, often hidden behind a stoic expression, because who wants to constantly complain about a tooth? The reliance on folk remedies and potentially harmful interventions also highlights the class and knowledge divide, even in a seemingly more egalitarian society like the Vikings compared to some others. While we don't have strict records of dental practitioners in the Viking Age, it's likely that practical knowledge of bone setting, wound care, and perhaps even tooth pulling was concentrated in the hands of a few individuals, perhaps elders or those with inherited knowledge. Access to even these rudimentary skills might have depended on your status or wealth within the community. A wealthy chieftain might have access to the best available, and by best, we mean slightly less terrifying, healer, while a thrall or poor farmer might be left to suffer, relying on home remedies or the help of a sympathetic neighbor with strong hands. It underscores how access to health care, even basic, brutal health care, has always been tied to social standing. Weird beliefs about teeth weren't unique to the Vikings. In many ancient cultures, teeth were seen as holding special power or significance. Losing teeth could be linked to losing vitality or even spiritual strength. Some cultures believed filing or altering teeth could connect you to ancestors or spirits. Others had complex rituals involving teeth, burying them for good luck, using them in charms, or interpreting their condition as omens. It speaks to a deep-seated human fascination with these strange, hard little bits of bone in our mouths. They're both incredibly functional and surprisingly fragile, and their condition feels intimately tied to our overall well-being. Imagine hearing that your toothache was a sign you'd offended a land spirit, and the cure involved leaving an offering by a specific rock formation while chanting. It's a different kind of stress than facing a drill, but a stress nonetheless. The concept of pain management, as we know it, simply didn't exist. There were no pharmaceuticals designed specifically to block pain signals. The goal was often to endure, to distract, or perhaps to use substances that induced unconsciousness or altered states, which were risky in themselves. Opium was known in some parts of the ancient world, but its availability and knowledge of its use would have been limited in Viking Scandinavia. So you relied on willow bark's mild anti-inflammatory properties, the numbing effect of cold, or perhaps just sheer willpower, and the hope that the pain would eventually subside on its own, or that the tooth would simply fall out. It's a testament to human resilience, but also a grim picture of daily life where chronic pain was simply a part of the landscape, like the biting wind or the hard earth. You didn't expect comfort, you expected to cope. The ache is a dull roar now, a background noise you've almost gotten used to, like the distant sound of the waves. You've learned to adapt, to favor the good side, to choose slowly and carefully, to avoid certain foods that might trigger a flare-up. Life goes on as it always does, but it's subtly diminished. The joy of a shared meal, the easy laughter that throws your head back without a second thought, the simple comfort of lying down without the fear of pressure on your jaw, these small pleasures are now tinged with caution. You feel a quiet resentment towards this tiny piece of you that causes such disproportionate suffering. The long-term consequences of these dental woes were significant, even if people didn't understand them in a medical sense. Chronic infection in the mouth could spread to other parts of the body, weakening your immune system and making you more susceptible to other diseases. Imagine a constant, low-grade infection draining your energy, making you feel perpetually unwell. Nutritional deficiencies were also common. If you couldn't chew properly, you might avoid tougher, more nutritious foods, relying on softer, perhaps less varied options. This could lead to a gradual decline in health, a slow sapping of vitality that made you more vulnerable to the myriad of other threats in the Viking world: injury, illness, harsh winters. It was a domino effect, starting with a seemingly small problem in your mouth and potentially impacting your entire lifespan. Facial disfigurement was another reality. Repeated infections could lead to abscesses that swelled the jaw and cheek, sometimes leaving visible scars or deformities even after they healed. Imagine living in a small, close-knit community where everyone knows everyone, and your appearance changes, perhaps becoming a permanent reminder of your suffering. While Viking society might have been more tolerant of physical hardship than some others, significant disfigurement could still impact social interactions and how others perceived you. It wasn't just about pain. It was about your face, your ability to function, and ultimately your place in the world. The diet, while seemingly natural, contributed significantly to these problems. Stone-ground flour often contained grit and small stones, which would grind down teeth mercilessly over time. Tough, dried, and smoked meats required vigorous chewing. Even seemingly healthy foods like rough bread and root vegetables demanded a lot from your dentition. Without the benefit of soft foods and the ability to easily process food into smaller pieces, teeth were under constant strain. It was a diet designed for survival in a challenging environment, not for preserving dental health. Every meal was, in a way, a tiny battle for your teeth. Thinking about the Viking dentist reminds you just how precarious existence was. It wasn't just the threat of raiders or storms at sea. It was the quiet, internal battles against disease and decay that could be just as deadly. The ingenuity and bravery in trying to tackle these problems, even with the most rudimentary and terrifying methods, is remarkable. It's a testament to the human will to survive, to alleviate suffering, even when armed with little more than hope and a sharp piece of metal. And it makes you look at the mundane act of brushing your teeth tonight with a quiet sense of gratitude. That small tube of paste, that soft-bristled brush, they are, in a historical context, truly miraculous tools. You wouldn't wish a Viking toothache or a Viking dentist on your worst enemy. And as that thought settles, the world of fjords and longhouses begins to gently recede. The biting cold fades, the scent of wood smoke softens. And as the rough wooden textures and salty air of the north melt away, the world softens. The air grows humid and thick with the scent of damp earth, incense, and something subtly floral, yet tinged with the unmistakable odor of human habitation. You find yourself standing not on a muddy path, but on hard-packed earth, perhaps in the bustling courtyard of a modest home or a quiet alleyway behind a market in a city you don't recognize. The sounds are different now, the distant clatter of ceramic pots, the rhythmic whisper of brooms sweeping dust, the low murmur of voices speaking a language you don't understand, punctuated by the occasional sharp bark of a street dog. The sun feels warmer here, heavier on your skin, and the clothes you wear feel lighter, made of silk or finely woven cotton, less bulky than the wool of the north. You notice the intricate patterns on the roof tiles, the delicate carvings on a wooden screen, the vibrant colors of painted doors. This is a world of different textures, different smells, a different rhythm entirely. You feel a prickling sensation on your skin, an itch that you can't quite scratch, a persistent irritation that has been bothering you for days. It's not the deep, throbbing pain of a toothache. It's something surface level, yet profoundly uncomfortable. As you look around this ancient Chinese setting, you realize that personal hygiene, while perhaps more sophisticated in some ways than the Viking world, still operated under vastly different assumptions than today. The interconnectedness of urban life, the sheer density of people living in close proximity, the lack of widespread plumbing and sanitation as we know it, meant that managing waste and preventing the spread of disease was a constant, uphill battle. Imagine the smells that would greet you daily. The sweet, cloying scent of incense might mingle with the pungent odor of night soil being collected for fertilizer. The aroma of cooking food, steamed rice, savory broths would compete with the smell of stagnant water in a ditch or the less than fresh air from overcrowded homes. This was a world where the separation between human waste and daily life was far less defined than we are comfortable with today. And in this environment, managing common ailments took on a whole new dimension of creativity. You might hear snippets of conversation about illness, about remedies being tried. Stories passed down through generations, based on observation, superstition, and a unique understanding of the body and its relationship to the world. This wasn't a place where you popped a pill from a sterile bottle. Healing involved balance, energy flow, connection to the elements, and, well, sometimes things that make your modern stomach churn just thinking about them. Ever wonder about ancient cures that sound absolutely baffling, perhaps even horrifying to us today? Prepare yourself. Because in ancient China, there was a widespread practice for dealing with certain persistent, irritating skin conditions that involved something you might encounter every single day and would ideally want to avoid contact with at all costs. It makes you appreciate your antibacterial soap in a way you never thought possible. It forces you to confront the fact that desperation, combined with limited scientific understanding, can lead people down some truly unusual paths. The itch persists, a low-grade torment that moves across your skin like unseen insects. You try to ignore it, to focus on the rhythmic clatter of a nearby loom, the scent of simmering ginger and garlic drifting from a window, but the irritation is a constant physical reminder. You shift uncomfortably in your light clothing, the fine silk doing little to soothe the underlying maddening sensation. You see others around you, their faces calm, their movements unhurried, and wonder if they too grapple with such invisible torments, or if it's just you. It makes you feel subtly disconnected, even in this crowded space in this world, where the concept of microscopic germs was utterly unknown. The causes of skin ailments like rashes, eczema, or persistent itching were often attributed to imbalances within the body, disruptions of vital energy chi, or the influence of external evils like wind or dampness. The remedies developed reflected this understanding. While acupuncture, herbal medicine, and dietary changes were sophisticated aspects of traditional Chinese medicine, there was also a layer of folk remedies, accessible to everyone, often born of practicality and a willingness to use whatever was at hand. And sometimes, whatever was at hand included things that make you want to reach for a bottle of hand sanitizer and never let go. Imagine you describe your persistent itch to a kindly neighbor, perhaps an older woman with a knowing look in her eyes. She nods sagely, having seen such things before. She doesn't suggest a complex herbal poultice requiring rare ingredients. No, her suggestion is far simpler, far more earthy. She might recommend applying fresh human urine to the affected area. Yes, you heard that right. Urine, preferably the morning urine, collected in a clean, by ancient standards anyway, vessel. The idea was that it was sterile, a common, though often incorrect, ancient belief about fresh urine and possessed properties that could cleanse, cool, or balance the skin. It was seen as a readily available, free, and surprisingly common cure for various skin complaints, from rashes to insect bites to general itchiness. You picture yourself considering this advice. The idea is repellent. Your modern sensibilities scream in protest. But imagine the context. The constant discomfort, the lack of effective alternatives, the trust placed in the wisdom of elders and community knowledge. Desperation is a powerful motivator. You might find yourself, perhaps privately, perhaps with a wrinkle of your nose, collecting a small amount, its warmth surprising, its smell unmistakable. You apply it to your skin, its liquid coolness a temporary relief against the heat of the itch, quickly followed by the drying, slightly sticky sensation. It's a bizarre, unsettling experience, a collision of necessity and revulsion. This practice wasn't limited to external application. In some cases, urine, particularly that of young boys believed to be especially pure or potent, was even ingested as a remedy for various internal ailments. This wasn't some dark, forbidden practice. It was sometimes openly discussed and recommended. It speaks to a fundamentally different relationship with the human body and its excretions. While we are conditioned to see waste products as purely negative and teeming with pathogens, ancient peoples sometimes saw potential therapeutic value. believing in cleansing properties or the presence of beneficial substances. Ever wonder what the most unconventional thing someone has ever recommended to you for an ailment is? Compared to applying or drinking urine, most modern folk remedies probably seem incredibly tame. It's a stark reminder that our definition of medicine is deeply rooted in our cultural and scientific context. The initial shock and revulsion of the suggestion have subsided, replaced by a quiet, weary consideration. The itch is still there, a low-grade fire under your skin, and the thought of any potential relief, no matter how unconventional, begins to gain a strange kind of appeal. You observe the flow of life around you, merchants hawking their wares, children playing in dusty alleys, elderly people sitting in quiet contemplation outside their homes. You realize that illness and discomfort were simply more visible, more integrated into the rhythm of daily life here. There wasn't the expectation of constant, perfect health that modern society often holds. A persistent itch, a cough, a low fever, these were common companions, managed with whatever means were available. The use of bodily excretions in medicine wasn't unique to ancient China, but it did feature prominently in some folk practices. Sweat, earwax, and even feces were sometimes incorporated into remedies, often based on the principle of like treats like, or the belief that the body's own substances held healing properties. This was happening concurrently with the development of highly sophisticated theories of pulse diagnosis, herbal pharmacology, and energy pathways within the formal system of traditional Chinese medicine. It's a fascinating duality, a complex intellectual framework alongside simple, sometimes deeply unsanitary folk practices. It's like having a world-renowned chef operating in the same village as someone who insists that eating dirt cures stomachaches. Both approaches existed, serving different purposes and accessible to different segments of the population. The widespread acceptance of practices like using urine for skin ailments speaks volumes about the state of sanitation and understanding of disease transmission. In environments with limited access to clean water for washing, and where human and animal waste were often in close proximity to living spaces, the risk of infection was constant. A small cut or rash could easily become seriously infected. While sophisticated irrigation systems and public works existed in ancient China, personal and household sanitation was a different matter. Chamber pots were common, emptied and their contents often used as fertilizer, a practical solution for waste management, but one that brought human waste into direct contact with the agricultural cycle, and by extension, the food supply. Imagine the air quality in a bustling ancient city, particularly in warmer months. The smells of decay, waste, and crowded living would be ever present. Diseases like dysentery, cholera, and various skin infections were endemic. In this context, the risk from applying a substance like urine while present might have been perceived as less significant compared to the persistent discomfort of an untreated condition or the risks associated with other, perhaps more invasive folk remedies. It's a chilling reminder that what seems incredibly dangerous and unsanitary to us was simply a pragmatic approach to dealing with suffering in a world where the fundamental causes of illness were a mystery. Ever wonder how resilient human beings are, capable of adapting to conditions that would make us, with our modern standards, utterly miserable and finding ways to cope, to heal, even with methods that seem counterintuitive or repulsive? It highlights the sheer drive to survive and find relief, whatever the cost to our modern sensibilities. The air hangs heavy and warm, carrying the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith and the closer, sweeter scent of blossoming jasmine trailing over a courtyard wall. You lean against a cool, plastered wall, the texture rough against your shoulder blade, and the persistent itch feels momentarily less intense in the shaded stillness. You watch a cat preening itself in a sliver of sunlight, its movements languid and deliberate, a picture of effortless comfort that you momentarily envy. You wonder how it would react to a sudden, maddening itch. Would it, too, resort to unconventional, perhaps unsavory, measures for relief? The willingness to use remedies like urine wasn't just about a lack of understanding of hygiene. It was also rooted in cultural beliefs about the body and its substances. In some Taoist traditions, for example, bodily fluids were seen as containing vital energy and could be used for purification or healing. There was a different framework for understanding health and disease, one that didn't villainize bacteria or see cleanliness in the same way. While there were practices of ritual cleansing and personal grooming among the elite, the everyday reality for most people involved a level of dirt and microbial exposure that would be unthinkable today. Think about how water was sourced and used. Rivers and wells served for drinking, washing, and waste disposal, often in alarmingly close proximity. There were no complex filtration systems or chemical treatments. Waterborne diseases were a constant threat, a silent enemy lurking in every cup. Washing clothes was a laborious process, often done in communal areas that could be less than pristine. Bathing might be infrequent, especially for the poor, and focused more on removing visible grime than on sterilizing the skin. In this context, the idea of using urine, which at least comes from within the body and was perceived as clean at the source, might have seemed less risky than using contaminated water or externally sourced, potentially dirty materials. Imagine the internal debate you might have. The smell of the urine is off-putting, the act feels wrong instinctively, but the itch is relentless, a constant demand for attention. You remember the stories you've heard, the quiet endorsements from people you trust who used it and claimed it helped. It's a strange battle between instinct and learned behavior, between revulsion and the desperate hope for relief. You might apply it cautiously at first, perhaps in a hidden spot just to see. The drying sensation, the slight tightness on your skin, is it working? Or is it just drying? It's a moment of quiet vulnerability, engaging in a practice that feels alien and uncomfortable, simply because the alternative is continued suffering. This willingness to experiment, to use what was available, highlights a key difference between ancient and modern approaches to health. We expect clean, scientifically validated, often manufactured solutions. They relied on observation, tradition, and a degree of pragmatic experimentation with the resources at hand. It wasn't necessarily logical in a modern scientific sense, but it was rational within their framework of understanding. It's a reminder that what we consider normal or acceptable medical practice is constantly evolving, shaped by knowledge, technology, and cultural norms. Ever wonder what current medical practice will seem utterly bizarre, and perhaps slightly horrifying to people a few hundred years from now? It's a humbling thought, isn't it? That even our most advanced treatments might one day be viewed through the same lens of bewildered fascination as we view the unsanitary cures of the past. And as this thought drifts through your mind, the smells of the ancient city seem to momentarily sharpen. The scent of jasmine now undeniably mixed with something less pleasant, a subtle reminder of the realities of life and healing in this time. The heat of the day begins to lessen, the long shadows stretching across the courtyard, softening the sharp edges of the world. The sounds change too, the calls of street vendors become less frequent, replaced by the quiet murmurs of families gathering for the evening meal. You can smell the distinct aroma of cooking rice, a comforting, grounding scent that momentarily anchors you in the present, away from the internal discomfort. You watch a child chasing a stray chicken, their laughter bright and clear, and you feel a quiet pang of longing for such simple, unadulterated joy, untouched by the nagging irritation on your skin. You consider the neighbor's advice again. You've heard similar things whispered among the market stalls, seen discreet gestures indicating certain, unconventional remedies. This isn't just one person's strange idea. It's part of a tapestry of shared knowledge, passed down through generations of trial and no doubt significant error. For ordinary people, access to highly trained physicians was limited, often reserved for the wealthy or powerful. Most relied on family members, neighbors, or local folk healers who used readily available ingredients and time-tested, or at least, repeatedly tried methods. Your neighbor perhaps learned this trick from her grandmother, who learned it from hers, a chain of pragmatic, if sometimes baffling, medical wisdom stretching back centuries. Imagine preparing to apply this cure. You find a moment of privacy, perhaps behind a screen or in a quiet corner of the courtyard as dusk gathers. The vessel is simple, perhaps a small ceramic bowl. The liquid inside is warm, its odor pungent and unmistakably, undeniably urine. There's a moment of hesitation, a visceral recoil from your modern instincts, but the itch, the relentless, infuriating itch, wins. You dip a piece of clean cloth, as clean as you can manage, into the bowl, its rough texture absorbing the liquid. You bring it to the affected area on your skin. The initial sensation is warm, then cool as it begins to evaporate. The smell is strong, undeniable, clinging to the air around you. You rub it gently onto the irritated skin, the liquid feeling strangely soothing for a brief moment, before the reality of what you are doing settles in. Burst, a wave of profound alienation washes over you. Here you are, a person from a future where sanitation is assumed, antibiotics are commonplace, and medicine is practiced in sterile environments, engaging in a practice that feels utterly primal, deeply uncomfortable, and fundamentally wrong according to everything you know. It's a jarring collision of worlds, a vivid demonstration of how drastically human practices and perceptions of health have changed. You feel a strange mix of disgust, curiosity, and a grudging respect for the sheer ingenuity and willingness to experiment born of necessity. You are performing a small, private ritual that millions before you in this land considered a perfectly normal, even sensible way to seek relief. And in that moment, the distance between your time and theirs feels vast, a chasm measured not just in years, but in fundamental understandings of the world and the body. This blend of formal medical theory and folk remedies was a hallmark of healthcare in ancient China. While emperors and wealthy elites could consult renowned physicians skilled in pulse diagnosis and complex herbal formulas documented in classic texts, the vast majority of the population relied on a mix of home remedies, local healers, and spiritual practices. These folk cures were often practical, using readily available materials, plants from the garden, substances from the household, and yes, sometimes bodily excretions. They weren't always scientifically effective, and some were undoubtedly harmful, but they were accessible. Ever think about the different levels of healthcare available even in your own society today? The gap between the cutting edge of medical science and basic accessible care. It's a historical pattern that repeats itself across cultures and across time. The methods change, but the disparity often remains. As the last light fades and the courtyard is illuminated by the soft glow of paper lanterns, the world outside your immediate vicinity becomes a place of shadows and hushed sounds. The air grows cooler, the humidity settling into a gentle dampness. The smell of the applied remedy, though drying, still lingers faintly, a subtle, earthy odor that you become acutely aware of. You sit quietly, listening to the night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the distant call of an owl, the muffled sounds of life continuing behind closed doors. The itch is still there, a persistent, low-level irritation, perhaps slightly less intense than before, or perhaps you are just growing numb to it. The belief in the medicinal properties of urine, while perhaps most famously associated with ancient China in this context, was actually present in various cultures throughout history, including in Europe. Alchemists and physicians in different eras experimented with urine, believing it contained valuable salts, minerals, or even essences that could be beneficial. It was sometimes used as a diagnostic tool, with the color, smell, and even taste of urine being analyzed to determine a patient's condition, a practice that persisted into relatively recent times, though hopefully without the tasting. So, while the practice in ancient China for skin ailments was one specific manifestation, the underlying belief in the potential medicinal value of urine was more widespread than you might think. It highlights a shared human tendency across cultures to look for healing properties in readily available, even unconventional, sources. Think about the placebo effect. Even if the urine itself had little or no actual therapeutic benefit for a skin condition, and in fact could introduce bacteria and worsen it, the belief that it would help, combined with the act of doing something proactive to address the discomfort, could have provided psychological relief. In a world where pain and illness were often endured with little hope of a cure, the power of belief and ritual should not be underestimated. You might have felt a sense of agency, of taking control, even if the method was objectively unsound. That feeling of doing something is a powerful motivator, even today. The societal acceptance of this practice also suggests a different attitude towards bodily functions and substances. In many ancient cultures, the body was seen as more integrated with the natural world, and its processes, including excretion, were viewed less through a lens of shame or disgust, and more as natural, albeit sometimes messy, parts of life. Our modern Western culture, with its emphasis on sterile cleanliness and discrete bodily functions, has a very different perspective. Imagine openly discussing using urine as a medicine with your friends or family today. The reaction would likely be one of shock and perhaps even disgust. In ancient China, among certain groups and for certain ailments, it might have been met with a simple nod of understanding, a shared knowledge of a common practice. This was not necessarily a clean society by our standards, but it was a society with its own complex systems of hygiene, medicine, and belief. The use of unsanitary cures like urine for skin ailments was a reflection of that system, a blend of limited scientific understanding, pragmatic resourcefulness, and cultural beliefs. It's a window into a world where healing was often a negotiation with dirt, discomfort, and the unknown. And as that thought settles, the faint smell of the drying remedy seems to become less noticeable, blending back into the other scents of the ancient night. The world outside your small, personal struggle with the itch begins to reassert itself, the sounds of the night growing more distinct. As the night deepens, the sounds of the ancient city soften further, replaced by the gentle murmur of wind through leaves and the distant barking of dogs. You lie on a simple mat, the rough texture of the woven reeds a familiar sensation against your back. The itch is still present, a low-grade hum, but the intensity has lessened, or perhaps you are simply growing accustomed to it. You think about the day, the strange juxtaposition of beauty and discomfort, the resilience of the people you observed, their lives a blend of hardship and quiet moments of peace. The long-term consequences of using unsanitary remedies like urine for skin conditions are hard to definitively assess from a historical distance, but it's safe to assume they weren't always positive. While anecdotal evidence might have suggested temporary relief, applying non-sterile substances to broken skin could easily introduce bacteria and lead to secondary infections, worsening the original condition or creating new, more serious problems. Imagine a minor rash becoming a festering sore, a small cut turning into a serious infection simply because the cure introduced harmful pathogens. The lack of understanding of infection meant that the link between unsanitary practices and illness was not clearly made. If a condition worsened after applying a remedy, it might be attributed to the severity of the original evil or imbalance, rather than the method of treatment itself. It was a feedback loop based on flawed assumptions, perpetuated by tradition and the absence of a germ theory framework. This wasn't malice, it was simply the best they could do with the knowledge they had. It highlights the immense impact of scientific understanding on public health. A simple concept like hand washing, or the understanding that bacteria cause infection, has saved countless lives and prevented immeasurable suffering compared to the practices of the past. Think about the emotional toll of chronic skin conditions in such an environment. Beyond the physical discomfort, there could be social stigma, embarrassment, and even fear. Skin ailments were visible, often disfiguring, and could make you feel ostracized. While ancient Chinese society had different standards of beauty and physical appearance than we do, severe or chronic skin problems would likely have been a significant burden. The desperation to find a cure, any cure, would have been intense, pushing people towards even the most unconventional and potentially harmful remedies. The availability of remedies was also tied to the materials at hand. In rural areas, people might rely heavily on wild-harvested herbs and substances readily found in nature or within the household. In cities, there might be access to a wider range of ingredients through markets and apothecaries, but these could be expensive or require specific knowledge to prepare. The urine cure had the advantage of being universally available and free, making it a go-to option for the vast majority of the population, regardless of their economic status. It was the ultimate accessible medicine, for better or for worse. This look into the unsanitary cures of ancient China is a potent reminder of how far medical understanding has come. It makes you appreciate the relative safety and effectiveness of modern treatments, even for something as seemingly minor as an itchy rash. It also encourages a certain humility, recognizing that our own current medical practices might seem strange or even barbaric to future generations. The faint smell of the drying remedy is almost gone now, absorbed by the night air. The sounds of the ancient city are fading, the textures softening. The persistent itch is still there, a quiet echo, but the journey through this strange landscape of ancient healing is drawing to a close. And the world around you begins to subtly shift once more, the air growing crisper, the humidity giving way to a drier coolness. And as the humid air and subtle, lingering sense of the ancient city fade like a forgotten dream, a cooler, bracing breeze finds you. It carries the sharp tang of salt spray, the deep, resonant smell of pine tar and aged wood, and the faint, exciting aroma of distant spices. The ground beneath your feet shifts from packed earth to rough cobblestone, or perhaps the uneven planks of a wooden dock. The sounds change again, the rhythmic creak of rigging, the distant shouts of sailors, the cries of gulls overhead, and the steady, purposeful footsteps of people going about their business in a bustling port town. The air feels different, cleaner somehow, yet still thick with the mingled sense of commerce and the sea. You find yourself in a place that feels both new and strangely familiar, a colonial American harbor town in the late 18th century. You notice the architecture, sturdy wooden buildings, brick facades, steep roofs. The clothing is different too: tricorn hats, linen shirts, breeches, long skirts, buckled shoes. People move with a certain energy, a purposeful stride that speaks of trade and hard work. But beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary scene, something is stirring, something quietly subversive. It centers around a simple, fragrant leaf brewed into a comforting, everyday drink. Tea. Yes, tea. That gentle, soothing beverage that you might enjoy in a quiet moment at home was, in this time and place, a commodity steeped in tension, defiance, and quiet rebellion. Imagine the smell of tea wafting from a shop, expensive and desirable. Now imagine that same tea being secretly unloaded from a ship under the cover of darkness, or hidden in plain sight among other goods. Because in colonial America, thanks to British taxation policies, tea had become something surprising. Contraband, the British government, seeking to raise revenue and assert its authority, had placed taxes on goods imported into the colonies, including tea. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was seen by many colonists as an unjust imposition, a tax levied without their consent or representation. No taxation without representation wasn't just a political slogan. It filtered down into everyday actions, including how people bought and consumed their favorite hot beverage. Ever wonder what it would be like if something as normal as your morning coffee or evening tea suddenly became illegal or prohibitively expensive due to taxes you felt were unfair? That's the reality many colonists faced. The British East India Company held a monopoly on the legal tea trade, bringing their tea directly to the colonies. But their legally imported tea came with that despised tax. Enter the smugglers. Resourceful, often bold, and certainly motivated by profit, and sometimes, perhaps, a touch of patriotic defiance, these individuals found ways to bring tea into the colonies without paying the tax. They sourced tea from other countries, the Dutch, the French, the Swedes, who were more than happy to sell to them. This untaxed, smuggled tea was cheaper, making it highly attractive to colonists who wanted their tea without contributing to the crown's coffers. You might walk past a shop selling the expensive, legitimate East India Company tea, its price reflecting the tax. Then, perhaps in a back alley or through a quiet word in a tavern, you could find access to the cheaper, smuggled stuff. It was a quiet act of defiance, a small rebellion brewed in a teacup. The aroma of tea was no longer just about comfort. It carried the faint scent of illegality, of skirting the rules, of choosing sides in a growing political divide. It makes you think about the hidden economies that exist everywhere, in every time, driven by demand and the desire to avoid perceived unfairness. It was like trying to bypass a frustrating online paywall by finding a clever workaround, but with more risk and potentially a lot more tea involved. The salt spray catches on your lips, a refreshing contrast to the warmer air of the land. You watch a ship being unloaded at the docks, its hull scarred by the sea, its deck a scene of controlled chaos as crates and barrels are hoisted ashore. The shouts of the longshoremen echo across the water, mixing with the rhythmic splash of the waves against the pilings. You can smell the wood of the crates, the faint mustiness of cargo holds, and beneath it all, that enticing, subtle fragrance of tea, even from the officially imported kind. It's a scent that promises warmth, comfort, and a moment of quiet contemplation in a busy world. The British taxes that made tea a flashpoint weren't just about tea. They were part of a series of acts: the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and later the Tea Act itself, designed to raise money from the colonies to help pay for the costs of the French and Indian War, and the ongoing administration of the growing British Empire. From the British perspective, it seemed perfectly reasonable. The colonies were part of the empire. They benefited from its protection, especially during the recent war, and they should contribute financially. But from the colonial perspective, it felt fundamentally wrong. They argued that they had no elected representatives in the British Parliament, and therefore, Parliament had no right to levy internal taxes on them. It was a dispute over fundamental principles of governance and representation, and tea, being a popular and widely consumed item, became a potent symbol of this larger struggle. It wasn't just about the cost of your afternoon cuppa. It was about whether you accepted Parliament's authority to tax you without your consent. Buying the legitimately imported taxed tea was, in a way, an endorsement of that authority. Buying the smuggled, untaxed tea was an act of quiet defiance, a vote cast with your purse. Imagine the conversations happening in homes, in taverns, on the docks, hushed discussions about where to get the good stuff, the untaxed kind, a shared understanding that you were participating in something slightly illicit, but also, for many, something politically righteous. The smugglers weren't necessarily revolutionary heroes, though some might later become involved in the patriot cause. They were also driven by the economics of the situation. There was a huge demand for tea, and a significant price difference between the taxed and untaxed varieties. This created a lucrative opportunity for anyone willing to take the risks. Smuggling wasn't just about sneaking tea off ships. It involved a complex network of suppliers in Europe, transatlantic voyages designed to evade British patrols, and methods for getting the tea inland without detection. Think about the hidden coves, the secret warehouses, the coded messages, the bribes paid to port officials who might look the other way. It was a sophisticated operation, a shadow economy thriving alongside the legitimate. One ever wonder what it would be like to be involved in a secret trade, knowing that a misstep could mean losing your cargo, facing fines, or even imprisonment? The thrill of it perhaps mixed with the constant anxiety of detection. You might see a ship arrive, seemingly carrying legitimate cargo, but you know through the grapevine that its hold contains bales of untaxed tea, carefully concealed beneath layers of other goods. You watch the movements on the dock, looking for any sign of unusual activity, any hint of British customs officials being more vigilant than usual. The aroma of tea in the air takes on a new layer of meaning, not just comfort, but conspiracy. It's a subtle tension that permeates the air, a quiet undercurrent of defiance bubbling beneath the surface of everyday life in the bustling port. The afternoon sun warms the cobblestones, reflecting the light back upwards and adding to the busy energy of the port. You watch a customs official in his smart, if slightly dusty, uniform, idly chatting with a sailor. They seem relaxed, oblivious to the potential illicit cargo moving around them. But you know from the subtle glances exchanged between certain dockworkers, the quiet way a particular cart is being handled, that the dance of smuggling is likely happening right under their noses. The air still carries that mix of sea, tar, and a faint, tantalizing hint of tea, the scent of forbidden comfort getting the tea into the colonies without paying the tax required ingenuity and a certain boldness. It wasn't just about sailing to a Dutch port and buying tea, it was about the return journey. British naval vessels patrolled the coastline, on the lookout for ships carrying untaxed goods. Smugglers developed various strategies to evade them. Some ships were designed for speed, hoping to simply outrun any pursuers. Others relied on navigating treacherous waters close to the shore, where larger naval ships couldn't follow. Still others used the cover of darkness, slipping into quiet inlets or up rivers under the moonless sky, quickly unloading their cargo before dawn. Once the ships were in port, the real challenge began. Getting the tea off the vessel and into warehouses or homes without being detected by customs officials. This was where discretion, speed, and perhaps a few well-placed bribes came into play. Tea might be unloaded at night, using small boats to ferry it from the ship to a hidden spot on shore. It might be concealed within legitimate cargo bales of textiles, barrels of rum, sacks of grain. False compartments built into the ship's hull were also used, ingenious hiding places designed to fool cursory inspections. Imagine the careful work of carpenters creating these secret spaces, the nervous glances exchanged as officials walked past, inches away from thousands of pounds of valuable, illegal tea. The smugglers themselves came from various backgrounds. Some were professional mariners who saw an opportunity for significant profit. Others might have been merchants or ship owners willing to engage in illicit trade. And the customers, they were widespread. Wealthy families who chafed under the taxes and wanted cheaper tea. Tavern owners who needed a steady supply to serve their patrons. Ordinary people who simply couldn't afford the taxed price, or who felt a quiet solidarity with the resistance to British authority. Buying smuggled tea wasn't just about saving money. For many, it was a political statement, a small act of defiance woven into the fabric of their daily routine. Think about the social scene built around this illicit trade. The hushed conversations in taverns about incoming ships, the subtle signals indicating who had the good tea, the network of trust and discretion that had to be maintained. It created a sense of camaraderie among those involved, a shared secret in defiance of distant authority. Ever wonder what it's like to be part of a quiet underground, bonded by a shared risk and a common goal, even if that goal is simply getting cheaper tea? It adds a surprising layer of intrigue to something as mundane as a cup of tea. It transforms a simple beverage into a symbol of resistance, a quiet act of rebellion steeped in hot water. And as you consider this, the gentle aroma of tea in the air seems to carry a whisper of hidden stories, of risks taken and rules broken for the sake of a favorite drink and a principle. The long shadows of late afternoon stretch across the port, painting stripes of light and dark on the worn planks of the dock. The air is cooler now, the sea breeze carrying a hint of the coming evening. The sounds of the day begin to wind down, replaced by the rhythmic creak of ships at anchor and the distant, comforting aroma of wood smoke from chimneys as people prepare their evening meals. You find a quiet spot to sit, perhaps on an old coil of rope, watching the last of the day's official business unfold. You notice the wary glances exchanged between some individuals, a subtle tension in the air that speaks of secrets and risks. Being caught with smuggled tea wasn't a minor inconvenience. It had serious consequences. For the smugglers themselves, it could mean the confiscation of their cargo, heavy fines, or even imprisonment. Their ships, their livelihoods could be seized. Imagine the potential ruin involved, risking everything you owned, your freedom, your ability to provide for your family, all for the chance to profit from a clandestine trade in tea. It wasn't a game for the faint of heart. It required guts, cunning, and a network of trusted individuals who wouldn't betray you to the authorities. For those who were caught buying or possessing smuggled tea, the consequences were usually less severe, but still unpleasant. They might face fines or the confiscation of the illegal tea. More importantly, they faced social repercussions. While many colonists were sympathetic to the cause of avoiding the tax, openly engaging in illegal activities could still draw unwanted attention from British officials and their loyalist supporters. There was an element of risk in being associated with the smuggling networks, a need for discretion and trust. Imagine having friends or neighbors who supported the British Crown. You certainly wouldn't discuss your source of cheap tea with them. The British authorities faced a significant challenge in trying to enforce the tea tax and crack down on smuggling. They had customs officials in the ports, but they were often outnumbered and sometimes susceptible to bribes or intimidation. The coastline was vast and difficult to patrol effectively. Ships could unload their cargo in countless bays, inlets, and rivers away from the main ports. Furthermore, there was a significant lack of local support for enforcing these laws. Colonial juries were often reluctant to convict smugglers, seeing them more as local heroes or businessmen providing a needed service than as criminals. It was incredibly difficult to get a conviction when the community itself was largely on the side of the lawbreakers. This widespread tacit approval of smuggling created a fascinating social dynamic. It fostered a sense of shared opposition to British rule, a collective act of civil disobedience focused on something as everyday as tea. Taverns and coffee houses became informal centers for discussing the tea situation, grumbling about the taxes, and discreetly arranging purchases of smuggled goods. It built bonds between people from different walks of life: merchants, sailors, laborers, housewives, all united by their desire for affordable, untaxed tea and their resentment of external authority. Ever wonder what small, shared acts of defiance exist in your own life, perhaps against a frustrating rule or a perceived injustice? Sometimes, even the quietest acts of resistance can build a sense of community and common purpose. And as you ponder this, the scent of pine tar and salt spray feels less like just the smell of the port and more like the scent of quiet determination, of a community subtly pushing back against the rules. The last rays of sun are painting the undersides of the clouds in hues of orange and pink, and the cool evening air is settling in. The port sounds are softer now, the sharp cries of gulls replaced by the rhythmic lapping of water against the docks and the distant sound of music from a tavern. You walk along the waterfront, the cobblestones smooth under your feet, worn down by generations of carts and footsteps. The smell of the sea is stronger now, less mixed with the sense of commerce. But even in this quieter moment, you notice the subtle signs: a man in a dark coat lingering by a shadowed alley, a small boat tied up in an unexpected place further down the coast, a knowing look shared between two individuals who pass each other without a word. The spirit of illicit trade is still in the air, a quiet hum beneath the surface of the settling town. The prevalence of smuggled tea had a significant economic impact. It directly undercut the business of merchants who were trying to sell the legitimately imported, taxed tea from the British East India Company. These loyalist merchants, who followed the law and paid the duties, found themselves unable to compete on price with the smugglers. Their customers were flocking to the cheaper, untaxed options. This created economic tension within the colonial communities themselves, pitting neighbor against neighbor, merchant against merchant, depending on which side of the tea divide they fell. Imagine being a merchant who played by the rules, watching your business suffer while someone down the street thrived by breaking the law, supported by the quiet approval of the community. It wasn't just about tea. It was about livelihoods and fairness, seen through the complex lens of colonial politics, and resistance women played a crucial, though often less documented, role in this quiet rebellion. They were the primary managers of household budgets and purchasing decisions. It was the woman of the house who often decided where to buy tea and how much to pay. Their choice to purchase smuggled tea wasn't just about saving money. It was a domestic political act. By choosing the cheaper, untaxed tea, they were participating directly in the resistance to British authority. They were making a statement with their everyday spending habits, a form of economic protest that resonated throughout countless homes. Imagine the conversations around the kitchen table, whispers about the latest shipment, the best place to find untaxed tea, the quiet satisfaction of knowing you were supporting the cause, however indirectly, with each cup brewed. You might find yourself in a small, unassuming shop, perhaps a general store away from the main harbor, known quietly to stock the other kind of tea. You don't ask for it directly. You might make a casual remark about the high price of East India Company tea, or comment on the quality of Dutch tea you once had. The shopkeeper, a man with shrewd eyes and a calm demeanor, understands. There's no overt display, no sign announcing smuggled tea sold here. The transaction is quiet, discreet. He might simply nod towards a plain, unmarked crate tucked away in a corner, or disappear into a back room for a moment, returning with a small, heavy package wrapped in plain cloth. There's a subtle exchange of glances, a shared understanding that this isn't just a simple purchase. It's participation in a quiet network, a small act of complicity. The air is thick with the scent of dry goods, spices, and that unmistakable aroma of tea, which in this context feels less like a comforting presence and more like a whispered secret. First, you hold the package of untaxed tea in your hands, its weight solid and reassuring. It feels like more than just leaves. It feels like a small piece of defiance, a tangible link to the growing unrest. This simple act of buying tea, a mundane chore, has transformed into something significant, something quietly rebellious. You realize that every cup you brew from this package is a tiny act of protest, a rejection of distant authority, a personal commitment to the cause of self-governance. The warmth of the package feels like a shared fire, a connection to countless others across the colonies making the same quiet choice. It's a powerful realization that the most ordinary actions can carry extraordinary weight, that even in the simple act of preparing a beverage, you are choosing sides. This shift from tea as a simple commodity to tea as a political symbol and a tool of resistance is a perfect illustration of how everyday life became intertwined with the revolutionary movement. It wasn't just grand speeches and political pamphlets. It was in the shops, in the homes, in the quiet transactions of daily life. The British government, by trying to exert control through taxation on a popular item like tea, inadvertently turned a comforting beverage into a catalyst for rebellion. It's like trying to force someone to pay an exorbitant tax on streaming their favorite show. People will find ways around it, and their frustration with the tax will fuel a larger resentment towards the authority imposing it. The story of smuggled tea is a reminder that revolutions aren't always started by armies. Sometimes they are brewed, one quiet, defiant cup at a time. The air is cooler now, carrying the damp scent of the nearby marsh and the fainter perfume of honeysuckle from a garden somewhere. The streetlights, simple oil lamps, cast pools of flickering yellow light on the cobblestones, creating long, dancing shadows. The port is quieter, the daytime bustle replaced by a more measured rhythm. You walk with your package of untaxed tea tucked discreetly under your arm, feeling a subtle sense of satisfaction mixed with a quiet wariness. Every person you pass seems to look a little longer than necessary. Every creaking sound makes you start slightly. The mundane act of carrying groceries has become fraught with a subtle tension, a quiet awareness that you are carrying a small piece of the resistance being part of this smuggling network, even as a customer carried risks beyond just getting caught. There was the risk of informants. Loyalists and British sympathizers were present in every town, and they were often on the lookout for signs of illegal activity. A casual boast in a tavern, a neighbor's suspicion, a disgruntled former associate, any of these could lead to being reported to the authorities. Imagine the quiet paranoia, the need to be careful about who you spoke to, what you said, and where you kept your untaxed goods. Trust became a precious commodity, built on shared risk and a mutual dislike of British taxation. Storing the smuggled tea also required ingenuity. You couldn't just leave bales of it sitting openly in your house. It had to be hidden. Secret compartments were built into walls, floors, or furniture. Attics and cellars became clandestine storage areas. Sometimes tea was disguised, packed into barrels labeled as something else, or mixed in with legitimate goods. Imagine the effort involved in creating these hiding places, the constant vigilance required to ensure they weren't discovered. It turned ordinary homes and businesses into small, private fortresses of defiance, where a teapot wasn't just a vessel for brewing a drink, but a symbol of independence, and the tea itself was hidden treasure. The social pressure to buy smuggled tea could also be significant, particularly in communities with strong patriot leanings. Choosing to buy the taxed tea, the legitimate kind, could be seen as a sign of loyalist sympathies, or at least a lack of commitment to the cause of resistance. While there were certainly colonists who remained loyal to the crown and bought the taxed tea, for many, participating in the smuggling economy was a way to demonstrate their solidarity with the growing movement for independence. It was a way to belong, to signal your allegiance without necessarily engaging in overt political activism. Ever wonder about the subtle ways social and political pressures influence your own daily choices, even today? What products you buy, what businesses you support, what opinions you express, these are often shaped in part by the desire to fit in, to signal belonging, or to quietly resist something you disagree with. The choice of tea in colonial America was a remarkably potent example of this, turning a simple consumer decision into a politically charged act. It highlights how, in times of tension and change, even the most mundane aspects of life can become battlegrounds of principle and identity. The scent of tea, once just a comforting aroma, now carries the faint undertone of a community making a choice, brewing not just a drink, but a quiet rebellion, one hidden package at a time. The sounds of the port are muted now, replaced by the steady rhythm of the tides and the distant mournful call of a ship's horn. The air is crisp and cool, carrying the faintest scent of salt and damp earth. You walk through the quiet streets, the occasional lamplight illuminating brief patches of your path. The package of tea feels lighter now, less like contraband and more like a connection to something larger than yourself, a shared experience of quiet defiance. You imagine the countless other homes where similar packages are tucked away, waiting to be brewed, each cup a silent toast to resistance, the curious case of early American smugglers. And their untaxed tea wasn't just a sidebar to the American Revolution. It was an integral part of the story. The economic impact on legitimate merchants, the frustration of British authorities trying to enforce unpopular laws, the widespread participation of ordinary colonists in the smuggling networks. All of this contributed to the growing tensions between the colonies and Great Britain. The Boston Tea Party, arguably the most famous act of defiance related to tea, didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of simmering resentment over taxation and a direct response to the Tea Act of 1773, which was seen as a British attempt to shore up the struggling East India Company and further assert their monopoly. And right to tax the Tea Act actually lowered the price of legally imported tea from the East India Company, making it cheaper than even most smuggled tea. The British thought this would encourage colonists to buy the legal tea, thus accepting the principle of taxation. But they fundamentally misunderstood the colonial mindset. For many colonists, it wasn't just about the price. It was about the principle of taxation without representation. Buying the cheaper, taxed tea felt like a betrayal of that principle. The smugglers and the colonial buyers who supported them had created a successful alternative market based on avoiding the tax, and they weren't about to give it up, even for a lower price. Imagine the debates and arguments that must have taken place. Some colonists might have been tempted by the lower price of the legally imported tea, prioritizing saving money. Others, however, would have argued passionately that buying the taxed tea was a surrender, an acceptance of illegitimate authority. The social and political stakes were high, and the simple act of choosing which tea to buy became a surprisingly weighty decision, loaded with political meaning. It was like being asked to choose between two identical products, one of which you know is produced under conditions you disagree with, even if it's cheaper. The choice is not just about the product itself, but about your values and your willingness to compromise them for convenience or cost. The legacy of this period goes beyond just the lead-up to the revolution. It highlights the enduring human tendency to resist authority perceived as unjust, and the creative ways people find to skirt rules they disagree with. It also shows how seemingly minor economic policies can have profound social and political consequences, turning everyday activities into acts of defiance. The story of tea smuggling is a reminder that history isn't just about grand battles and famous leaders. It's also about the quiet choices of ordinary people, the subtle acts of resistance woven into the fabric of daily life. And as you reflect on this, the scent of tea, wherever you might next encounter it, will perhaps carry a faint whisper of 18th century harbors, of quiet defiance, and of a revolution brewed, quite literally, in a teacup as the sounds of the port fade entirely and the cool night air settles around you. The journey through these historical dreamscapes comes to a gentle close. The discomfort of the Viking Age, the strange remedies of ancient China, the quiet rebellion of colonial America, they all recede into the distance, leaving behind a sense of wonder and a quiet appreciation for the resilience and complexity of human history. Done 3 story, Sweet Dream.